Welcome to the Celebrity Estates Wills of the Rich and Famous podcast. In this podcast, we break down high-profile celebrity estate planning cases for advisors and their clients. Most celebrity estate catastrophes are based on the same issues that everyday people face, just with the volume turned up. Our goal is to identify and extract the individual estate planning issues that lie at the heart of each story. We then discuss what advisors should expect and how to avoid common pitfalls. Hosted by wealthmanagement.com senior editor David Lenok.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the latest episode of wealthmanagement.com's Celebrity Estates, Wills of the Rich and Famous. For anyone new to the podcast, in each installment, myself and a guest take on a different celebrity estate and attempt to extract some key lessons that planners can apply to their more traditional clients. The idea being that celebrity estate planning stories, although often ridiculous in their details, generally have at their cores very basic issues that can just as easily apply to non-famous or fabulously wealthy clients. To learn more about estate planning and how you can better serve your clients, visit wealthmanagement.com/trusts-estates. Our monthly journal features tax law updates, wealth planning, retirement planning, and much more, written by thought leaders in the industry. That's wealthmanagement.com/trusts-estates. Now, our guest today is a really interesting one, Victoria Gray. Victoria currently serves as the Deputy Chairman for Bonhams North America, where she serves a critical role in advising estates, trusts, fiduciaries, and professional advisors in the valuation and disposition of tangible personal property, aka stuff. Since joining Bonhams in 2003, Victoria has been responsible for leading the efforts in bringing important collections to market for sale and assists estate advisors to auction, private sales, and appraisal services. With well over 2 decades of experience in the auction business, she's a nationally recognized speaker and routinely lectures on the art market and estate planning with tangible property at organizations such as ACTEC and Art Table. So our episode today, if you couldn't tell already, is going to be a little different. Instead of focusing on a single celebrity story, Victoria is going to offer us some insights onto what happens to a celebrity estate when it goes to auction. She's going to share some tales from the trenches about some of the sales she's spearheaded at Bonhams, which includes such famous names as Senator Dianne Feinstein, Barbara Walters, Lauren Bacall, Joan Collins, and RBG herself, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, just to name a few. And we've sort of taken on a broad leading ladies sort of theme here to tie these otherwise disparate estates together with some sort of theme. So, Victoria, I think it's best to just start at the beginning. How does the estate auction process kick off?
Yeah, it's celebrity estates are always an interesting one, David. Obviously, when a celebrity passes away, there's a lot of press and publicity and an outpouring often in the national or international community about that celebrity, about that iconic person. So Bonhams has a private and iconic collections department, and this department just serves these sort of private and iconic collections of notable, sometimes not as notable figures, but all of these celebrity auctions that come through Bonhams go through this private and iconic collections department. So we will often, receive a phone call about somebody who has passed away. We'll use Senator Dianne Feinstein, for example. We sold her collection last year. It was a very broad collection. The attorneys called us and sometimes will come in and do the estate tax appraisal, or they will just right off the bat say this entire collection is going to be sold, and we will use the sale price for the estate tax filing. Senator Feinstein, for example, had 6 residences across the United States, everywhere from Hawaii to Washington, D.C., and in between. A large home in Aspen, a beautiful home in the Pacific Heights neighborhood of San Francisco. But all of the collections were slightly different. For example, in her Aspen home, she had a very interesting Native American collection. In her San Francisco home, there was a large safe where she kept all of her jewelry and watches. Her home in Washington, D.C., where she entertained a lot of national and international political figures, was filled with important California and American paintings. We found this particularly interesting because all of her Yosemite scenes of the Bay Area, beautiful California paintings were filled in her home in Washington, D.C. She was truly the senator from California. So we're often called into these estates and we look through every nook and cranny of their homes to find little mementos. And what I mean by mementos are normal objects, right? Things that to you and me, are not particularly valuable. And if we sold them, they would not be that valuable. But because these are intimate little objects, they're so meaningful in these celebrity and iconic figures in their lives that everyone wants to buy a piece of them. So these sort of, a piece of their everyday life. We'll use the example of Ruth Bader Ginsburg, for example. We sold her salt and pepper shakers. These were ordinary. They sat on her kitchen table. We have photos of her sitting at her kitchen table with just a little pair of ceramic salt and pepper shakers. The day that those went up for auction, her salt and pepper shakers sold for $4,800. The exact same pair were up for sale on eBay the same day, and they were up for sale for $200. So it shows the premium that sort of magic dust of that celebrity and that iconic person puts on these objects of everyday life. But these are very intimate objects. So your salt, RBG's salt and pepper shakers, she used them. They were sort of a window outside of, the public life. People can see inside of, how people lived and what they treasured and they liked. So that's why it's so important.
It's interesting. When you were speaking to me about these on a prep call we had earlier, I kept thinking back to, I'm going to age myself here a little bit, I guess, but that episode of Seinfeld where George buys John Voight's car and it has like the pencil that he chewed, and then they find out he didn't chew the pencil. All of a sudden, no one wants the car. And it's just this like sort of ridiculous, like it's the same thing. It doesn't matter, but because, John Voight might not have chewed that pencil in this car, then no, I don't want it now.
So you bring up a really good point. Like, how do we know that, these objects were theirs and were used by them? Who chewed the pencil, for example? So we will give a proposal for sale, and oftentimes we're competing against several auction houses to win the business of handling the auction of this celebrity estate. But one of the things that we find critical after we've won the piece of business and we've been appointed to handle the auction of these collections are going in and taking interior in-situ photography. So taking photographs of the what we call our interior shots or room shots of how the celebrity arranged these things in their home, how they lived, where they kept certain items. But these photos are also important because they also prove a level of authenticity, right? So we have a photograph of the salt and pepper shakers sitting on the kitchen table in Ruth Bader Ginsburg's home. Like, we know that those came from her home and that she used them. For when we handled the estate of Barbara Walters, for example, she had a very important and famous interior designer, Mario Botta, handle the interior decorating of her Fifth Avenue apartment. And so to see the way that he had arranged the objects, the curtains he chose, the rugs, and how everything was placed and arranged in situ, that gives the potential buyers and collectors a window into how they lived privately. We know a lot, for example, about Barbara Walters' public life. She was, a larger than life figure. She was on TV for decades. But how did she live privately when she was away from that public life? And that's what these interior photography and these room shots, that's what these provide.
It's very interesting. So, it's almost as, though like a realtor, for a more normal sale would sort of stage an apartment. This is sort of the opposite. It's like anti-staging in a way, where they would take my furniture out and either, I guess digitally now, move in sort of nicer, better, furniture. They were designed this, prefer this. It's sort of like, no, this is exactly how it was. We're sort of just trying to take it in the best light, but also to make it be, it's important that it remains how they left it, because that's kind of the point.
That is exactly the point. So we will tell the trustee or the executor, don't touch anything. Please don't move anything. If the teacup was left right there on the side table, leave it right there. We want to preserve it exactly how it was when that celebrity or that iconic person passed away. So we'll go in and, sometimes we'll add fresh flowers or we'll sort of, do some dusting and some polishing. But other than that, we try and leave it exactly how it was when the person lived there. When we handled the estate of Lauren Bacall, she had a beautiful apartment in the Dakotas. And, it was a time capsule. So we went in and we dusted off some of the paintings and perhaps, we polished the dining room table. But besides that, we photographed it exactly how she had it and how she preferred it. So these photographs, will go into press releases. They'll also go into the making of the auction catalog. And the auction catalog is probably the most important marketing tool for a celebrity collection. It's interesting because over time, the auction catalogs actually become a collectible in its own right. So, these auction catalogs for celebrity estates will sell out. And we'll find the auction catalogs on eBay, and people love to have those. We sold a lot of items from the estate of Elvis Presley, many decades ago, and that auction catalog goes for a lot of money on eBay and different auction catalog sites. So it's pretty interesting. Once the auction catalog is published and it comes out, and there's a press release, oftentimes we will give an exclusive to certain publications to break the story of this celebrity auction. So with Barbara Walters, for example, 2 years ago, we gave the New York Times an exclusive to be the first ones to break the story. And we really try and focus on, where was that figure, that celebrity, where did they have a following? Where were their things most important? And at that point, we will take things on a national and international tour. The collection for Senator Dianne Feinstein, for example, only went on a national tour. It did not go on an international tour because she was very much a U.S.-based figure and had a U.S. following. So she was the senator from California. We felt it was very important to do a full public exhibition for 3 or 4 days in both San Francisco and in Los Angeles. But someone like Lauren Bacall, she had a relationship with a British artist, a modern British artist named Henry Moore. And one of the things that we sold were her collection of Henry Moore sculptures, drawings, and there was all this correspondence going back and forth between Lauren Bacall and Henry Moore. She flew several times to the UK to go to his studio in person. So we felt it was really important to send her Henry Moore sculptures and works of art to our office in London for exhibit in the UK. This particular artist, he's a modern British artist. He has a very strong following in England. And we find at a certain level, collectors and buyers and art dealers will buy fine art because of what it is and not because of who owned it. And that was very much the case with these works of Henry Moore. So collectors and buyers purchase them because of their importance from an artistic standpoint and an art historical standpoint, and not because of the Bogey and Bacall memorabilia.
Mm-hmm. So it's interesting. You mentioned there's like this interesting aspect here of, obviously you're taking these things around to advertise them, but there is also sort of almost a preservation and an anthropological, in a way, kind of idea where you're acting as a museum for a couple of sessions where anyone can kind of come in and check these things out.
You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. And the storytelling and the narrative that is created around the collection, that is what sells it. Mm-hmm. So there is no printed advertisement or no marketing and press campaign that sells the collection or the items belonging to that celebrity as much as the storytelling around it. And the national and international tour and having those items on exhibit for, open to the public wherever they are, whether it's in our Hong Kong office, whether we send them to our London sale room, wherever they are put on view. Sometimes things go to Paris based on who the celebrity was. But what's most important is the storytelling. And I think this is something that Bonhams and our private and iconic collections department is really adept at creating a narrative around these objects, whether they were objects of everyday life or a really important jewelry collection. That is what sells it. So finding pictures of the celebrity, wearing those items, or more importantly, just what is the story behind this item? If we look, for example, at the estate of Ruth Bader Ginsburg, we had her publication, her book of the Harvard Law Review. So she was one of two female editors at the time of the Harvard Law Review, and this was her personal copy. And she had made notes in the margins, all these annotations. She was the editor at the time that this publication was made. Ruth Bader Ginsburg's personal copy of the Harvard Law Review sold for $150,000.
Wow.
It had a pre-auction estimate of, say, $2,000 to $3,000, but there was fierce and intensive bidding from across the globe for this particular item. And it was really the narrative around it and the support of the fact that she was only one of two female editors of the Law Review at the time, that she had recently passed away, and that she was obviously such an iconic figure in the women's movement. So that was something that we saw. We couldn't believe also that we had more bidders, first-time bidders in the Ruth Bader Ginsburg auction, more first-time bidders than we'd had in any other auction globally. And we had more bidders under the age of 40, which we thought was really fascinating. So Ruth Bader Ginsburg was obviously somebody who appealed across multiple generations. It was not just baby boomers or, sort of middle-aged, but all of these new bidders under the age of 40 who were sitting at home fiercely battling it out online for things like her personal copy of the Harvard Law Review. So creating that storytelling is really what sells it. And it's something that Bonhams has been really great at for decades now. Jewelry is another aspect of celebrity collections that receives a lot of hype and attention. I think one of the reasons is that jewelry as an asset class is so intensely personal, right? Nothing is more personal than jewelry. It is something that's worn on that figure. Jewelry is also often gifted for special occasions, birthdays, anniversaries, certain milestones and achievements. So jewelry is gifted, it's worn, it's been on the figure. Oftentimes it's engraved. We sold the incredible jewelry collection. We worked on the estate of Secretary of State George Shultz. So George Shultz was Secretary of State under Ronald Reagan, and his wife, Charlotte Shultz, was Chief of Protocol of the city of San Francisco and also the state of California under Governor Gavin Newsom. So she had one of the most incredible jewelry collections, partly because of the rarity of the items that she had. So Tiffany and Company, she had, I would say, over 80 pieces of Tiffany and Company jewelry. Charlotte Shultz and Secretary of State George Shultz were American royalty. They were these important American figures, and they chose to collect a very American brand of Tiffany and Company, not Cartier or Van Cleef & Arpels or, one of the famous French or European brands. They chose an American brand. And Tiffany and Company will often make limited pieces of certain designs. So she had a beautiful necklace. It was the Hedges and Rose necklace by Schlumberger. It was designed by Schlumberger specifically for Tiffany and Company, and they only ever made 4 necklaces of the hedges and rows. Nobody could just walk in off the street and buy that necklace. You needed to be invited to purchase the necklace. So Tiffany and Company reached out to Secretary of State George Shultz and invited him to purchase that necklace. That's another aspect of celebrity access, right? Not anyone can purchase this. It's the celebrity access to purchase and own these certain important pieces. So, jewelry has this excitement and this intensive interest around it like no other collecting category that we see in these celebrity and iconic estates.
So, you had a great line, like literally right before we got on, where you said the wonderful thing about leading ladies is that they have jewelry. So definitely it seems like it's a very exciting item to have in sort of these auctions.
It really is. And jewelry, more than any other collecting category, we find will go for many, many multiples of the pre-sale auction estimate, not only because of what it is, but also because it was worn on that celebrity and people truly believe that they are buying a part of that story and that person, and they feel a closeness to that celebrity when they can have a piece of that jewelry. And of course, there are so many images online now. You can find lots of photographs of these iconic figures wearing either the pieces of everyday jewelry or the really important jewelry. Senator Feinstein's jewelry collection was a really fascinating one. She was a civil servant, right? A U.S. senator. And so she chose to wear very moderately priced jewelry. She chose to wear hard stone necklaces, jade, malachite, semi-precious stones, nothing of great value in terms of as an object. I think the optics of a U.S. senator, a civil servant, dripping in diamonds would not be a good one, right? So she had incredible jewelry by wonderful brand names, Buccellati, Cartier, but she didn't wear it, or she at least didn't wear it in public. Those were items that were locked in the safe. So the pictures that we have of Senator Feinstein are all wearing, beautiful necklaces, but nothing of great value. But once we opened up her safe and we discovered what was in there and what her late husband had gifted to her, it was really a treasure trove.
That's really interesting. One of the most interesting aspects of this whole auction process to me, part of it was something that I wasn't even aware of till we had a prep call, is sort of the timing of when these sales happen. I wasn't aware that there is an auction season, but, so where normally these sort of big auctions occur, but it would make sense to me as a layman that, the closer to the death, when sort of publicity, as you mentioned, is sort of at its fever pitch would be the best place, the best time to sell. So, how do you decide when, to strike, I guess, when the iron is hot, or when to hold off on something till auction season, or sort of like when to hold the sale?
Exactly. Yeah. So traditionally, auction season has been spring, fall. So, the big 20th and 21st century fine art weeks are in May and November in New York every year. There is Asia Week, the big Asia Week in March and September. So oftentimes, if a celebrity has a large collection in a certain particular genre or collecting category, we will try and time the auction to coincide with one of those major seasons in New York or London or Paris. The Hong Kong auctions out of our Hong Kong gallery are the same. They are spring and fall. But oftentimes, the celebrity collections can be sold what we call off-season. Because of the intense interest, they don't need to necessarily be tied to a certain season. We are seeing so many new buyers and specifically online bidders for celebrity auctions. So, say we've been appointed to handle the celebrity auction. We've taken the in-situ photography, the interior photos. We've put together the beautiful auction catalog. We've had the big press announcement. The select highlights from the collections have gone on a national or international tour to the Bonhams global locations. Then auction day comes, right? And at that point, we have to bring in, for the days days leading up to the auction, we over-index on our client services teams who are answering the phones at the ready to register bidders, because we often find there are so many first-time and new bidders who are not used to the auction process. They haven't registered before, they don't know how it works, but we often find the level of online bidding with these celebrity auctions is much higher than a non-celebrity auction. So people bidding will be battling it out online, via the Bonhams app on their telephone, just sitting at their computer. They can watch it live online, but they are less likely to go into the sale room and raise a paddle in person or to bid on the phone. I think it gives them a level of privacy. They find they're not bidding under duress, where they're in an auction room with the auctioneer about to drop the hammer down on the podium. They can bid from the comfort of their own home online, and it's a much more relaxed experience for them. And I think it takes some of the intimidation out of the auction day.
Yeah, imagine, with the proliferation of, obviously eBay, even though it seems like a million miles away from, what sort of Bonham is doing, it's more sort of everyone has that almost daily, experience with that sort of auction site. So I imagine doing things online just makes it's just more comfortable for them, more typical of their normal experience, rather than, going to a physical auction, still is like one of those last vestiges of like glamour, in a way, and sort of, maybe not stuffiness, but sort of like, upper society that we have in this country, where it still has that sort of veneer of that happening. It's very intimidating. So I can definitely see where sort of the eBayification of the process can, bring in a lot of people just because, okay, I know this. I'm not going to embarrass myself. I'm not going to make a faux pas of some sort at this very fancy place.
Yeah, it's, COVID was really a forcing function for the auction industry in terms of moving so much of the bidding online. And even if it is a live auction, you can still bid live online. Mm-hmm. So Ruth Bader Ginsburg, when we sold her library, for example, that was a 10-day online auction. We knew there would be so many new bidders and first-time bidders that we didn't want them to feel like they had to bid under duress. So we opened up the auction online, and it was open for about 10 days of bidding. So you could go in, look at an item, check, place a small bid, and then go ahead and check it again later, go place bids on new items. If you're outbid on something for a strictly online auction on the bonhams.com website, then you get a notification. David, your bid of $2,000 has been outbid. Would you like to bid again? And so you get a push notification saying, or an email saying, you've been outbid. Would you like to try again? And so oftentimes with these celebrity auctions, it works best to do that online format. However, with many auctions, we do both a live and online format. So with Barbara Walters, with Senator Dianne Feinstein, we had a live auction component of, say, 100, 150 lots that went live. You could still bid online, but there was a live auctioneer that you'd be watching on your computer screen as you click away on your mouse there. But then concurrent with the live auction, there was an online auction of, say, another 100, 150 items of more moderately priced items. Mm-hmm. So the higher value items, the $5 to $10 million collection goes live, a live auction, and there's the concurrent online auction where you can buy a piece of this celebrity and a piece of this story at a much more moderate price point. It's also a way to serve the estate. So the executor and the trustee is not left with a bunch of moderately priced items or a big mess to clean up. It's a really great way for Bonhams to offer the estate a full suite solution on handling the estate as a whole.
Yeah, I'm glad that you brought the estate back up, because that's really sort of the point here, right? That it is an estate that's asking you to do this, and sort of, you're not just to get as much money as you can, but to sort of facilitate the whole process of dispersing these items and sort of closing out eventually that estate. And, a more, I imagine, boring part of that for a lot of people, less glamorous, is sort of the estate tax aspect of things and the valuation aspect of things. Do you mind sort of talking about sort of your role in that process?
For sure, David. Oftentimes why we are called in on the celebrity estate or this very iconic person in their collection is to provide an estate tax appraisal to be used in conjunction with the 706 estate tax filing. So we will put together a qualified fair market value appraisal, which is used for the estate tax filing. And what's really interesting is how do you include the provenance or sort of, the history and the ownership history of the piece? How do you include the provenance in the fair market value, right? Because if I was to value your salt and pepper shakers, David, with all due respect, you are famous in the world of wealth management.
I'm already insulted with how the sentence has started, so I'm going to stop this.
So, your salt and pepper shakers, or mine for that matter, $200, $250.
I wish
fair market value. Exactly, right? But then, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, how do we take into account that magic dust in the value? What we will often see is that the executor or the trustees will choose to sell the estate within a year or year and a half of the passing of that celebrity. They will then file the estate tax return with the actual sale prices, so the actual fair market values as opposed to the estimated fair market values. Sometimes there are children of the decedent who have selected and chosen certain items to keep from the estate, in which case we will do an estate tax appraisal on the items that are being retained by the beneficiaries, and then we will use a separate report for the fair market values of everything that is sold. And, the filing price, of course, the fair market value is not just what we call the hammer price or the price that the gavel goes down to in the auction room. It also includes the buyer's premium, which is approximately 25%. It's an extra charge that the buyer pays on top of the hammer price. And the reason that we use both the hammer price and the buyer's premium is because the IRS states that the fair market value is the total amount that the buyer would have to pay, excluding any applicable taxes, of course. So the total amount that the buyer would have to pay is the hammer price plus the buyer's premium. So if it goes down for $1,000, the fair market value is approximately $1,250.
So, having the sale makes everyone's life a lot easier because you have a hard number. But, if you have to do it without the sale, then you're in this very awkward position of trying to value things, in provenance, which is sort of this intangible thing, but also have to deal with the fact that, celebrities and artists especially, like their things become worth more when they're dead. And sort of this is the thing with the Michael Jackson estate conflict was a lot about this, where it was like he was at this very low point, after all the allegations against him. But then when he died, all of a sudden everyone loved Michael Jackson again, and his estate quadrupled in value. And so, well, what number are we using, right? Are we using the Michael Jackson that everyone was ashamed to say they liked, or are we using the dead Michael Jackson that everyone's allowed to love again? And you end up with these sort of vastly different possibilities in terms of what the valuation could be.
You make a great point. And these valuations are massive too, right? Celebrities often have 3, 4, 5 very large homes packed full of things. We will bring in our colleagues from our Hong Kong office, from our London office, depending where in the world these celebrities had residences.
So, we're just about running out of time here, unfortunately. I feel like we have a lot more to talk about, but we don't have as much podcast as I would like. So I'm going to have to sort of start wrapping things up here, but I always have one question. This is maybe a little out of left field that I'm always curious about, where, if you have a large ticket item at one of these auctions, what happens when the buyer can't pay? In terms, I imagine just goes, with something smaller, I imagine the buyer can't pay, it goes just back into it's just resold. But is it an issue that is then now would be sort of removed from all of the work you did to publicize the initial auction? Do you go to individual bidders? What happens?
Yeah, our client services team does extensive buyer vetting and KYC compliance in terms of who they allow to bid. So if you're bidding on, if you would like to bid, for example, on a 7-figure item, something like that, we will run, further credit checks. Oftentimes, if it's a very high priced item, we will get a bank letter saying that they have the funds to pay for such item. From time to time, with these so many online bidders around the world on these kind of more the memorabilia and the mementos from these estates, sometimes, a buyer might back out and not pay. In that instance, we have very good records of what we call the underbidder. So say the bidding opened at $200 and the final sale price was $500. Somebody bid at $450, somebody bid at $475. Who were those underbidders? So we have all of the records of the underbidders. If the buyer who won the item at the auction for $500 for some reason does not pay, then we go to the underbidder at the person who bid $450, and we say, listen, the buyer defaulted. Unfortunately, would you still like it at $450? And 9 times out of 10, they say yes. So that's usually how we would handle a situation like that.
Very interesting. Thank you for that was like I was wondering how that would go down. But as I mentioned, sort of that's rapidly running out of time here. I'd like to thank, Victoria Gray for coming on and giving us a glimpse into sort of this world that I think, we talk about quite a bit, but understand so little about in terms of these high-end auctions. So, thanks so much for coming on, Victoria. Thank you for having me, David. It's been a pleasure. And also just, to mention that Bonhams will be having, in July, an event or sale of Dorothy Lichtenstein's item. Would you like to speak a bit about that before we jump off? Yeah. Absolutely. Dorothy Lichtenstein passed away in July last year of 2024. We are holding the auction of her and her late husband, Roy Lichtenstein's beautiful collection from their New York home out in Southampton in Long Island. So Roy Lichtenstein, obviously, the father of pop art, mm-hmm. And Dorothy Lichtenstein, who was an amazing philanthropist. She was the co-founder of the Roy Lichtenstein Foundation. She donated his downtown studio in Manhattan. She gifted that to the Whitney Museum of American Art in New York. But we are offering their personal collection from their home in the Hamptons this coming July, in July of 2025. And it will be their personal art collection, their furniture, the objects that the artist chose to surround himself with. Mm-hmm. We are titling the auction Artist in Residence, the personal collection of Dorothy and Roy Lichtenstein. It's about 170 lots. But Dorothy's estate will be our next option to purchase, one of these leading ladies and a memento from their truly incredible life. So yeah, all the listeners, if you're interested in that, or even just, checking out the items, keep your eyes open sometime in July. And, that's about all the time we have. So for all the listeners, I'll see you, or I guess you'll hear me on the next episode of Celebrity Estates, Wills of the Rich and Famous.
Thank you for listening to the Celebrity Estates Wills of the Rich and Famous podcast. Click the subscribe button below to become notified when new episodes become available. The information covered and posted represents the views and opinions of the guests and does not necessarily represent the views or opinions of InformaWealthManagement.com. The content has been made available for informational and educational purposes only. The content is not intended to be a substitute for professional investing advice. Always seek the advice of your financial advisor or other qualified financial service provider with any questions you may have regarding your investment planning.